My whole life, I feared becoming a burden to my son, until the day I lay in the emergency room and heard him tell the nurse, "Every day she stays alive is another day of misery for me." For 30 years I thought my son Julian was an ambitious man. It turns out, he was just a man who was deeply afraid. My name is Ilara. I gave him and his wife Celine everything to start an art gallery. When I was dying in the hospital, he chose a dinner table over me. But this story is not about why he did that. It is about what he was using my money to pay for. I followed the trail, not to the glamorous art world of Paris, but to a Swiss bank account created to bury a secret with a heartbeat, hidden by his wife. It all began on a Tuesday afternoon, on what seemed to be an ordinary day in October. I was strolling down a familiar street in Le Marais, a street I had walked 1,000 times. The air was crisp, and the leaves were beginning to turn yellow. My routine was simple. Every afternoon I would stop by the bakery, Le Fournil de Marais. The little bell on the door chimed as I entered, a familiar sound. The smell of butter and baked sugar in the air was the scent of familiarity, the scent of 30 years of my life. I had been coming here since Julian was just a child in a stroller, his mouth smeared with chocolate crumbs. It was my small, peaceful world. I greeted Marie, the owner, and ordered a chocolate croissant. I leaned against the counter, waiting for her to wrap it up. And then, it happened. It was not a sharp pain. It began with a heavy pressure on my chest, as if an invisible hand was squeezing my heart. I could not breathe. The buttery scent in the air suddenly became foreign and suffocating. The room began to tilt. I saw Marie's face blur, her mouth open, calling my name, but the sound could not reach my ears. I reached out to hold onto the counter, but I missed. The yellow lights smeared. My last memory was of the shop's old patterned tile floor rushing up to meet me. The first thing I recognized when I woke up was the smell of antiseptic, clinically clean. Then came the sound, a steady, monotonous beep from the machine beside my bed. I opened my eyes. The fluorescent lights on the ceiling were white, cold, white walls, white sheets. I was in a hospital room, a completely unfamiliar place. My mouth was dry. I felt completely alone. A nurse entered, her eyes weary. "Mrs. Moreau? Can you hear me?" I managed to nod. "You have had a severe heart attack," she explained. "We need to contact your next of kin." She glanced at a chart. "Your emergency contact is Julian Moreau, your son. Is that correct?" Julian. Hearing his name, a faint, warm feeling spread through my chest. My son. My pride. He would be so worried. All feelings of fear and loneliness melted away. "Yes," I whispered, my voice hoarse. "Please, call him." "I will call him right away," the nurse said, then stepped into the hallway for privacy. I lay there, staring at the slightly ajar door, waiting. Each minute passed so slowly. I pictured him rushing in, his face pale with worry, grabbing my hand. Just the thought of it was enough to make me feel better. About 5 minutes later, the nurse returned to the room, but she was alone, and her expression, it was strange. A mixture of confusion, almost disbelief, blended with a touch of professional sympathy. "What is it?" I asked, my heart beginning to beat faster. Is he coming?" The nurse avoided my gaze. She adjusted my IV drip, an unnecessary gesture. "I spoke with your son, Mrs. Moreau," she began, her voice hesitant. "I informed him that your condition is critical, that the doctor said you might not make it through the night." She paused, seeming to choose her words carefully. Her hesitation frightened me more than any blunt statement ever could. "And what did he say?" I urged, my voice trembling. The nurse finally looked at me. He said, "He has an important dinner tonight." I was stunned. An important dinner?" "Yes," the nurse said, maintaining a professional tone that could not hide her discomfort. "He asked me if I had any idea how difficult it is to get a reservation at that restaurant." The room was silent, except for the steady beeping of the machine. "Is he coming?" I asked again, even though I already knew the answer. He said, the nurse swallowed, that if there were any, Changes, we should call him back in the morning. The nurse quickly checked the vitals on the monitor and then left, leaving me alone with that truth. A truth colder than the bakery's tile floor. A truth more painful than the heart attack itself. Not a single question about my well-being. Not one. Is my mother in pain? Not a hint of worry. Just an inconvenience. My life, which the doctors were trying to save, was merely an inconvenience that interrupted his fancy dinner. L'Ambroisie. The name echoed in my head. I knew that restaurant. I remembered it vividly. Just 6 months ago, Julian had come to me, his face filled with urgency. He said he needed to entertain an extremely important Swiss art collector, someone who could change the fate of the gallery. He said that only a dinner at L'Ambroisie would be of a high enough caliber. I had not hesitated. I had withdrawn a large sum from my savings, money I had intended to use to repair the roof, and gave it to him. Go ahead and use it, I had said, for your future. Now, that future was being used to ignore my death. I lay there staring blankly at the soulless white tiles on the ceiling. I counted them. 1, 2, 3, 4. I tried to focus on something meaningless, because otherwise, I thought my heart would literally break. Julian's words, relayed by the nurse, were sharper than any scalpel, if there are any. Changes. Call back in the morning. Changes. My death, in his words, was just a change. The machine beside me began to shriek, its beeps fast and frantic. The nurse rushed back in, her face etched with alarm. Mrs. Moreau, you need to calm down. Your blood pressure is spiking. But I did not hear her anymore. I no longer felt the physical pain. There was only a cold emptiness. In that moment, Ilara, the unconditionally loving mother, died. The woman who had spent a lifetime making excuses for his selfishness, who had believed that behind his busy facade was a loving heart, that woman was no more. All that remained was a 60-year-old woman in a hospital bed, alone, a wounded woman. And beneath that wound, something else was beginning to smoulder. It was not grief. It was rage. Cold, clear, and more potent than any drug they were pumping into my veins. That rage is what kept me alive. A week later, I walked out of the gates of St. Antoine Hospital on my own. The doctor said my recovery was miraculous. He attributed it to a strong constitution. But I knew the truth. It was the rage that had kept my heart beating, that had kept my blood flowing. It gave me a purpose. During the entire week I lay there, Julian did not visit. Not once. Instead, on the third day, a hospital employee brought in a fruit basket, the pre-packaged kind from the gift shop in the lobby, with crinkly cellophane and a pale ribbon bow. Inside was a small card. On it were the printed words, "Get well soon." Below was a scribbled signature, Julian. Not your son, Julian. Just Julian. As if he were signing a check. I told the nurse to take the fruit basket and share it with the other patients. I did not want anything of his in my room. When I returned to my apartment in Le Marais, everything was the same. The afternoon sun still streamed through the window, scattering golden dust over the old stacks of books. But I had changed. This apartment was no longer a home. It was a testament to 30 years of blind sacrifice. I sat down in the old armchair, the one where I had sat 1,000 times to read, to wait for Julian to come home when he was little. And I began to remember, not with nostalgia, but with a painful clarity. I remembered the day I sold my husband's Patek Philippe watch. It was the only memento he had left me, the object he had cherished most. I could still recall the cold feeling of the metal on my hand that last time. I had sold it without a moment's hesitation because Julian needed the deposit for his first art gallery. He had hugged me and said, "I will never forget this, Mom." It turns out, he had forgotten. I looked around the apartment, these 4 walls, which held my entire life. I remembered the day I went to the bank and signed the papers to mortgage it. Julian needed a large sum of money to invest in a promising young artist. He said it was a life-changing opportunity. I had believed him. I had staked the very roof over my head, my only security on his gamble. And then I remembered Celine, his wife. I remembered the parties at the gallery. Celine, always beautiful, always sharp in her designer dresses. I remembered the way she would glance at my dress, an elegant but not designer one, and say just loud enough for me to hear, "Your mother's style is so simple, simple." That was her word for my thriftiness. The thriftiness that had afforded them that glamorous world, a world in which I always felt like an outsider. Each memory no longer caused me pain. They became bricks. Brick by brick, they built a solid wall inside of me, a wall of determination. I sat there, in the silence of the apartment, and let those memories settle. They were no longer bleeding wounds. They were now fuel. I stood up. I did not walk toward the bedroom to rest as the doctor had advised. I went straight to the wardrobe and took out the navy blue suit I used to wear when I worked as a translator, for when I needed clarity and strength. I applied my makeup carefully, not to hide the fatigue, but to project resolve. For the first time in years, I was not doing this to impress anyone. I was doing it for myself. I did not take the taxi home. I hailed another one and gave the driver the address of the BNP Paribas branch on Boulevard Saint-Germain. Monsieur Dubois had worked there for 30 years. He had handled Julian's student loans. He had witnessed me withdraw my savings to support the gallery. He knew my family's financial situation, perhaps even better than I did at the time. His secretary seemed surprised to see me, but she showed me in immediately. "Mrs. Moreau," Monsieur Dubois said, standing to shake my hand. "I heard you were unwell. You are looking much better now." "I have never felt better, Monsieur Dubois," I said, my voice calm. I sat down in the chair opposite his desk, a solid oak desk. We exchanged a few pleasantries. About the weather, about the state of the economy. I let him talk. I just sat there, my hands resting neatly on my handbag, and waited. Finally, he asked, "So, what can I do for you today?" I looked him directly in the eye. "I want to freeze all joint accounts between me and my son, Julian Moreau," I said, emphasizing each word. "I also want to withdraw my name from every guarantee I have signed for his business loans. Immediately." I paused for a second, then continued. "From this day forward, my assets are my own." Monsieur Dubois showed no surprise. He simply looked at me, a long, deep look. His gaze held no curiosity. It held understanding. It was the gaze of a man who had witnessed too many family tragedies play out through the figures on paper. He had seen these stories before. He did not ask a single question. Not one. Why? He just nodded slowly. "I understand, Mrs. Moreau. Let me prepare the necessary documents." I returned home at 5 in the afternoon. I did not even take off my coat. I went straight to the kitchen and put the kettle on the stove. I knew it would not be long, and I was right. At 6:30, the doorbell rang. It was not a polite chime. It was a long, frantic, angry peal. I went to open the door. Julian stood there. His hair was a mess. The expensive cashmere coat he was wearing was disheveled. His face was ashen, so pale I could see the faint blue veins beneath his skin. He was drained of all color. He did not greet me. He stormed past me into the middle of the living room. "Mother, what have you done?" His voice cracked. I gently closed the door. "The bank just called me." He turned, staring at me. "They said the accounts have been frozen. The automatic payments were declined." He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of panic. "Do you have any idea what is going to happen? My investments, the gallery's rent, the staff's salaries." He went on, but I was not listening. I just watched him. I went into the kitchen. The kettle whistled. I took my Limoges porcelain tea set out of the cabinet, the one I only use for special occasions. I carefully placed the Earl Grey tea leaves into the pot. I poured the hot water. Every movement I made was slow, deliberate. I placed a teacup on a tray and brought it out to the living room. I set it on the table in front of Julien. "You seem stressed, Julien," I said, my voice perfectly calm. "Have some tea. Is something wrong?" My question, my silence, the cup of steaming tea on the table, all of it drove him mad. He looked at me. His eyes were wide. And for the first time in 35 years, I saw something different in his eyes. Not arrogance, not perfunctory affection. It was panic. The pure panic of someone about to lose their source of funding. The panic of a child whose favorite toy is being taken away. The panic of a weak man realizing the safety net beneath him has just been cut. In that moment, he was no longer my son. He was just a stranger standing in my living room. After that night, Julian did not contact me again. His silence was more terrifying than his rage. He was waiting, waiting to see what I would do next. I knew I could not stop here. Freezing the accounts was only the first step. I needed to know the truth about the past years, the truth about my money. I considered hiring a private investigator, a man in a trench coat, sitting in a car with a camera. But the thought seemed foreign and cold. This was a family matter, a personal tragedy. I did not need a stranger rummaging through the ruins of my life. I needed a friend. The next morning I called Helene. Helene and I had been friends since university. She was one of the sharpest notaires, public notaries in Paris before she retired. Helene was not just intelligent. She had an eye for seeing what others wanted to hide. She had spent her entire career reading between the lines of the most complex contracts. We met at our usual cafe near the Luxembourg Garden. "You seem different, Elara," Elaine said as soon as I sat down. "I feel different," I replied. I told her everything. About the heart attack. About the phone call. About Julian. I told the story calmly, without a single tear. When I finished, Helene did not offer any empty words of comfort. She simply remained silent, stirring her coffee gently. "What do you want me to do?" she asked. "Helene, I do not need a detective," I said. "I need a friend with a sharp eye for deceit. I need you to help me understand." Helene nodded. "Let me see." She did not take long. With her connections and expertise, Helene began to dig. And what she found was stranger than I could have imagined. A week later, she called me back. "Meet me at the usual place," she said, her voice serious. When I arrived, Helene was already waiting. She said nothing, simply pushed a thin file toward me. "Julian's gallery," she began. "Those expensive paintings he was always so proud to show off. Most of them are on consignment. He does not own them." I frowned. "Then what about the investments in young artists? The money I gave him?" "This is the strange part," Helene interrupted. "I have checked the cash flows. The money you gave Julien never went into the gallery's business accounts. It was not used to purchase artwork either. The money trail vanishes from his account, but there is no evidence that it was ever invested." She paused, looking directly at me. "Their lifestyle, Elara. The trips to Monaco, Celine's handbags, the dinners at three-star restaurants. It all seems to be a performance, a very elaborately staged performance. But I do not understand why." I looked through the file. The numbers, the bank statements. None of it made sense. Where had my money gone? Helene placed her hand on the file, stopping me. "There is something else," she said, her voice low. "Something more important." She pulled another piece of paper from her handbag and pushed it toward me. On that paper was the information for a bank account. An account in Geneva, Switzerland. The name on the account was a man I did not recognize. Beside it was a list of wire transfers. Regularly, monthly. For the past 5 years, the amounts matched with a frightening accuracy. The times I had given money to Julian. "Elara," Helene said, her voice gentle, but each word landed like a hammer blow. "That money was not for Hermès bags or vacations in Monaco. It was transferred directly into this account." I looked at her, utterly confused. "Whose account is this? Why?" And then Helene told me the truth. The truth was not about greed. It was worse. It was about cowardice. Helene explained that Celine, before she met Julien, had an ill-fated affair in her youth. The result of that affair was a son, a secret she had buried for years. The child's father, a terrible man, had found her after she married Julien. He began to blackmail her. He threatened to reveal this secret, to destroy the perfect life Celine had painstakingly built, to destroy the gallery's reputation. to destroy everything. I sat in silence, absorbing every word. My entire world was being reshaped. And Julian? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Did he know? He knew everything, Helene affirmed. He knew from the very beginning. She looked at me, her eyes filled with sympathy. But instead of facing the truth, instead of protecting his wife honorably, he chose the easier path. He lied to you. He made up stories about business, about investments, about opportunities that could not be missed, all just to take your money to solve his wife's problem. I leaned back in my chair. My whole body felt cold. And what about the lavish lifestyle? I asked. The parties, the trips. A performance, Helene said. A performance to deceive you, Elara, to justify the huge sums of money they needed. They had to appear successful so you would believe your money was being invested wisely. I looked out the cafe window. People were still walking by, laughing and talking. Life went on. But my world had just shattered. The anger inside me did not disappear. It just transformed into something else. A deep pain and contempt. My son was not an ungrateful man. He was a coward. He had not just taken my money. He had turned my love, my sacrifice, into a tool for his and his wife's deceit. I no longer felt the burning rage in my chest. That anger, the thing that had kept me alive in the hospital, had now vanished. It was replaced by a feeling of emptiness, a cold pain, as sharp as a shard of broken glass. I had prepared myself to face a greedy son, but I was not prepared for this. He had turned me into a tool. All my sacrifices were not to build a future for him, but to patch up his wife's deceitful past. This pain was worse than death, because it killed all the memories, all the beliefs I had held on to for the past 35 years. I needed to end this. The next day, I called Julian. I want to see both of you, I said, my voice calm. This afternoon at 3 at my apartment. What is it, Mother? He asked, a hint of nervousness in his voice. Just come, I said, and then I hung up the phone. They arrived at precisely 3 o'clock. I had asked Helene to be present. She sat quietly in the armchair in the corner of the room, a silent witness. Julian and Celine sat on the sofa, looking tense. I did not beat around the bush. I did not talk about money. I looked directly at Celine. Tell me about your son in Strasbourg, I said, my voice devoid of any emotion. Celine's face went white. Her eyes widened in horror. Everything shattered. She looked to Julian for help, but he just sat there like a statue, his eyes fixed on the floor. Celine burst into tears, the streaks ruining her perfect makeup. She confessed everything between sobs. I listened, but I felt nothing. No pity, no anger, only emptiness. When she had finished, I stood up. I do not care about the money anymore, I said, my voice clear and precise. Money can be earned back, but trust and respect cannot. You have built a prison for yourselves with your lies, and now it is time for you to live in it. I walked over to the small table and took out a piece of paper that Helene had given me. I will not call the police. I will not destroy you. I will do something far worse. I will let you deal with your own consequences. I placed the paper on the table in front of them. On it was the bank account information of the blackmailer. He is your enemy, not I said. Go and face him yourselves. I looked at them. Celine was sobbing, her beautiful face now blotchy and pathetic. Julian remained motionless. His shoulders slumped as if all his strength had been drained away. He did not dare to look up at me. Then I pointed to the door. Go, I said. They stood up silently and left. That was the last time I saw them together. Now, as I sit here in the quiet of my apartment, I look out the window. The sunset is painting the rooftops of Paris pink. It has been 2 years. I heard they did, as I said. They sold the gallery. They sold the luxurious apartment in the 7th arrondissement. They sold everything of value to pay off that man one last time, and somehow managed to bring him to justice. But their marriage could not survive after the final lie was exposed. Its foundation was too weak. Celine moved away, to Strasbourg, to be with her son. I hope she has found peace. and has started a new, more honest life. As for Julian, he is no longer wealthy, no longer glamorous. He now manages a small bookstore in Montmartre, an ordinary, honest job. Every Sunday, at exactly 10 in the morning, he calls me. Our conversations are not long. We never talk about the past. He just asks, "Are you well, mother?" And I answer. For the first time in years, I know he genuinely cares. Not because he needs something from me, but because he has nothing left to lose. I have finished my story. The rage in the hospital that day saved my life. It gave me the strength to act. But it was letting go and forgiveness, not for them, but for myself, for having been so blind that truly set me free. The sweetest revenge, I realized, was not watching their world collapse. It was finding peace within my own soul. Sometimes, on autumn afternoons, I still walk to the Le Fournil de Marais bakery. I still buy a chocolate croissant. The smell of butter and sugar is still just as sweet. The place where it all began was also the place I was reborn.